Hello and welcome to this section where we talk about how to prepare for your review. Well, you may have already had a review or this might be your first time. Either way, this section is going to talk a little bit about how you can maximize the review process and prepare effectively. We're going to cover a few things that I highly recommend you do before you step into the interview or the review process. The first thing is to have a list of things to talk about beforehand. We're going to be conducting a SWOT analysis later on in this course, but for now, let's talk about some of the major things. The first thing that you should be ready to talk about are some of your biggest challenges that you're facing, as well as your biggest accomplishments. You'll notice that I put accomplishments in capital letters because that is the balancing part of the performance review. You don't only want to talk about the challenges that you're facing, you also want to be ready to talk about what you've done and what you've achieved, as well as to reflect on your previous reviews and the results of those reviews. Connect what you did before to what you're doing now. Secondly, be honest about what isn't working for you. Remember, it's important how you frame the discussion. And what that means is to think about the words you use when you talk about your performance. There are very useful phrases such as, one of the challenges that I have faced have been X, Y, and Z, as opposed to saying something like, I am worse at doing this, or I am really, really terrible at doing X. It's important for you to think about how you are framing these, and it's important to use positive framing in the way that you come across, okay? And let me give you a few more examples. In a performance review, one of my employees came out and said, I'm absolutely terrible at my job, and I think that what isn't working for me is that I'm working long hours. We had to have a dialogue and a discussion about how the employee could reframe that conversation. They were being honest with me, which I appreciated, and that's what the first thing that I said. Thank you for the honesty that you are sharing. But let's look at how we reframe this conversation, the language that I helped this person develop. The first thing that I suggested was, instead of describing her work as terrible, let's look at her previous performance reviews and see where her strengths are and the good work that she has done. That was the first piece. So instead of using the word terrible, we used the word challenges, or we used the word difficulties that she is facing. The second thing we spoke about was, instead of saying she's working long hours, was to think about her overall work schedule and talk about her work in relation to the value that she is putting in and the value that she is getting out, and talk about schedule rather than being overworked. Address the core rather than the outcome. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but that's just an example of how we were able to reframe the way she was describing her performance. Be alert, upbeat, and ready to talk. There's nothing worse than sitting in a sleepy performance review. Be well rested, focused, and prepared to talk about your job. Have a few points that you would like the manager to leave with when they're thinking about your performance review. Let them leave with 3 key things. And I like to start off my performance reviews when I'm receiving them by starting off with 3 key things that I want my manager to take away from that discussion. And often it will be about the results that I've achieved, the work commitment or ethic or leadership or some quality that I've achieved, and thirdly, what I'm trying to get to achieve next time. So that's how I like to frame my 3 things. An example of what I like to walk into a performance review with is, I say that I'm very grateful and very happy that I've achieved my sales figures. I've not only achieved the sales figures, but I've also been a leader in my team. And finally, I hope to grow in the area of leadership so that I can develop further. So notice that the first thing I spoke about was an objective measure. The second thing I spoke about was how I work in a team. And the third thing I spoke about was what I need to achieve going forward. And I can only do that if I'm engaged in the performance review. And that leads me to my fourth piece, which is be ready to discuss your role in the big picture. It's always important to know the mission of your organization and to talk about not only the mission of your organization, but the department that you might be in and how your work fits in to that overall picture. And be ready to talk about your performance in relation to those goals, the overall goals, the macro goals, and the micro goals as well.